Evolution is anti-biblical, but no one understands why. This video explains why in 4 simple steps. First, evolution is believed to be a fact. It is claimed to be a fact. Darwin presented his theory in 1859 very triumphantly, and before the century was out, evolutionists were claiming it to be a fact. In fact, here, Joseph LeConte, a professor at University of California, said evolution was a law. The law of evolution is as certain as the law of gravitation. Nay, it is far more certain. 1923, H. Lane, in this book, he had a chapter entitled The Fact of Evolution. Evolution is a demonstrated fact, said Lane. Later, Gavin de Beer, 1964, evolution is a fact. 1999, the National Academy of Sciences. Now that's the most prestigious science organization in the United States. The occurrence of evolution in this sense is a fact. Leading historian Peter Baller in 2003 wrote that by mid-century in the 1950s, evolution had become a fact. The modern synthesis was now known. How life on Earth evolved, the history of life on Earth was now known, wrote Baller, referring to the modern synthesis, the new version of evolutionary theory in mid-century. 2009, Jerry Cohen, Why Evolution is True. I think the book's title kind of says it all there, Why Evolution is True. Cohen is making a very high claim of the truth of evolutionary theory. By far, the consensus position is that evolution is a fact. I've just shown you a smattering to give you a flavor of the literature. Okay, step number 2. Evolution fails on the science. Evolution claims that tens of millions of species on Earth arose by themselves, but evolution lacks a plausible cause. How fundamental innovations originate in evolution remains one of the most enigmatic questions of biology. The tree of life is being politely buried. What's less accepted is that our whole fundamental view of biology needs to change. A general theory by which complex adaptations are acquired remains to be developed. Genetic mutation rates for complex organisms, such as humans, are dramatically lower than the frequency of change for a host of traits. The rapid emergence of trait variety is difficult to explain just through classic genetics and neo-Darwinian theory. So in other words, even just the rate of mutation doesn't work. It's too low, even if random mutations could create life on Earth. How body pattern evolves in nature remains largely unknown. Scientists continue to argue about particular explanations or mechanisms at work in specific instances of evolution. This brief overview indicates that the problem agenda associated with modern synthesis theory is extensive. Now, problem agenda, an interesting phrase there. What they mean is the list of problems. The list of problems with evolutionary theory is extensive. Contemporary evolutionary biology comprises a plural landscape of multiple coexistent conceptual frameworks and strenuous voices that disagree on the nature and scope of evolutionary theory. Evolutionists argue because there is no convincing explanation. They have no plausible cause. Studies are showing that adaptive mutations are observed in a range of organisms. In other words, mutations that are not random, not indifferent to need, as evolution requires. That is just one of many failed predictions of evolutionary theory. Evolution has failed dozens of fundamental predictions. You can see my playlist on evolution's false predictions. But let's go back to that Wikipedia quote. Scientists continue to argue about particular explanations or mechanisms at work in specific instances of evolution, but what? The fact that evolution has occurred and is still occurring is undisputed. It is still a fact. Those problems, the problems I just went over or just summarized, don't matter. So we have seen that evolution is claimed to be a fact, fails on the science, yet still must be a fact. So what is going on? Okay, step 3, mandated by theology. Back to H. Lane's book, 1923. But Darwin's theory of natural selection has been found inadequate to explain all the facts and phenomena of nature to which it has been applied. its sufficiency as an explanation has been under fire from the scientific ranks almost from the moment of its publication in 1859. Evolution may prove inadequate or even incorrect without in the least affecting the standing of the evolutionary idea itself. This is exactly what that Wikipedia quote said a century later. Back to that quote, scientists continue to argue about particular mechanisms at work, but the fact that evolution has occurred and is still occurring is undisputed. So the science doesn't matter here. Something else is going on. What's going on? If evolutionists still argue about the mechanisms, how can they know evolution is a fact? If the mechanism is unknown, how can evolution be a fact? There is no known plausible cause for evolution. So let's have a look at this quote from Darwin, 1859. We have no more reason to believe in such a relation than we have to believe that the same bones in the hand of a man, wing of a bat, and fin of a porpoise are related to similar conditions of life. Now what's this about? Darwin is making a powerful argument for his theory of evolution, but it's a little strange. Let me translate the language first just to make it clear. What he's saying here is that a similar bone pattern is found in species with different conditions of life. That's the key point. A similar design is found in species with different conditions of life. Darwin repeatedly presents this as proof of evolution. Let's look at another example. We cannot believe that the same bones in the arm of the monkey, in the foreleg of the horse, in the wing of the bat, and in the flipper of the seal are of special use to these animals. Darwin's point here is that the bone structure, the bone pattern, is not customized. You see the same bone pattern, a similar bone pattern, in different conditions of life. He then claims this is powerful proof of evolution. Look at the next sentence. We may safely attribute these structures to inheritance. So how is this? Why? Evolution, if true, certainly could have produced customized bone patterns. I mean, after all, evolution created all life. Let's look at another example. Why should similar bones have been created in the formation of the wing and leg of a bat, used as they are for such totally different purposes? This is the same argument. Similar bone pattern, different conditions or applications or purposes. You have the wing of the bat and the leg of the bat. The wing for flying, the leg for grasping, walking, and so forth. Similar bone pattern, different purposes, different conditions. Same argument, except it is framed as a rhetorical question this time. Why should? Let's have another look here. Why should? You'll see this a lot in the evolutionary literature. Why should? It's a rhetorical question. Why is this question powerful proof of evolution? This time Darwin explains. Let's back up to the beginning of the passage. How inexplicable are these facts on the ordinary view of creation? Now, Darwin's using that phrase, ordinary view of creation, for what we would call creationism today, ordinary view of creation. This doesn't make sense on creationism. He is saying God would not create these species as they are designed. It is an argument against creationism. God would not create these species, therefore they must have evolved. Let's look at another example from that same passage. Why should sepals, petals, stamens, and pistils in any individual flower, though fitted for such widely different purposes, be all constructed on the same pattern? Again, the same argument, and again framed as a rhetorical question. It is, of course, theological, as we just saw. How inexplicable are these facts on the ordinary view of creation? This is where the power of the argument comes. It is an argument against creationism. God would not create these species, therefore they must have evolved. Darwin's book was full of these sorts of religious claims. I am showing you one of them just to give you a flavor. That didn't change after Darwin. Let's look at some examples back to H.H. Lane, 1923. Again, this chapter on the fact of evolution. Intensive study of adaptation has served to make clear, beyond the possibility of contradiction, that perfect adaptation rarely, if ever, is to be found in nature. The idea that a given organ is the best possible for its use can be shown to be untrue in innumerable cases. Skipping down. Thus, the vertebrate eye was a favorite object for discussion on this view. But the truth is that as a mechanism for receiving and recording images of the external world, it is so imperfect that were a camera maker to try to sell such an imperfect product, he would soon find himself without a market. Any eye specialist can point out numerous ways in which the structure of the eye, wonderful as it is, might be improved to serve better its assigned function. I like that assigned function there at the end, little teleology thrown in, its assigned function. But I hope you feel the weight of the argument, the strength, the power of the argument. Skipping down. To be perfectly adapted for its particular function, each should have its own particular structural plan. And yet, an examination of the limbs of a turtle, a bear, a horse, a whale, a monkey, a bird, a bat, and a mole reveals the fact that these are all built on the same fundamental plan. Again, the same argument. 1952, Arthur Lindsay. If special creation were the source of the many kinds of living things, it is reasonable to suppose that each would have the best possible equipment for its mode of life. Well, more than just reasonable to suppose, Lindsay will use this as one of his strong arguments for evolution, for the fact of evolution. The limb anatomy example became an icon of evolution, endlessly repeated in textbooks. Here's a figure from a 2004 textbook, popular 2004 textbook, showing that limb anatomy example proof of evolution. Back to the National Academy of Sciences. For example, the skeletons of humans, mice, and bats are strikingly similar, despite the different ways of life of these animals and the diversity of environments in which they flourish. Strikingly similar, different ways of life. The same argument. Stephen Jay Gould. The imperfection of nature reveals evolution. Perfection could be imposed by a wise creator or evolved by natural selection. Well, no, actually, there's no evidence that natural selection could do that, but let's move on. Evolution lies exposed in the imperfections. Why should a rat run, a bat fly, a porpoise swim, and I type this essay with structures built of the same bones? Again, the rhetorical question reveals the metaphysics. An engineer, starting from scratch, could design better limbs in each case. Why should all the large native mammals of Australia be marsupials? Again, another rhetorical question. Continuing, marsupials are not better or ideally suited for Australia. Many have been wiped out by placental mammals. This was a powerful argument for Darwin and later evolutionists that when new species were introduced to a region and they wiped out the native species, that really was powerful evidence for evolution because of this argument, this theological argument. God would customize designs so they are perfectly adapted to their environment. Richard Dawkins. Each photocell is, in effect, wired in backwards, presumably suffering at least some attenuation and distortion. Another imperfection argument. Why does that prove evolution? Because it disproves creationism by assuming a doctrine of God. Dawkins made a similar argument about the recurrent laryngeal nerve. No intelligent designer would have ever done that. Another imperfection argument. Jerry Cohen. What I mean by bad design is the notion that if organisms were built from scratch by a designer, one who used the biological building blocks of nerves, muscles, bone, and so on, they would not have such imperfections. Perfect design would truly be the sign of a skilled and intelligent designer. Imperfect design is the mark of evolution. The particular bad designs that we see make sense only if they evolved. Now, note the word only. It reveals an IFF logic, if and only if logic, which requires omniscience. Evolution is claimed to be a fact. The fact is proved by theological premises, not atheism. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wait a minute. Jerry Cohn, Richard Dawkins, Stephen Jay Gould, David Hume, these guys are atheists and they moved the needle. They were good communicators. They made these powerful arguments. They were atheists. What do you mean, not atheism? Don't confuse the person with the argument. All of these arguments I've been showing to you are theological, not from atheism. I realize they claim to be atheists, but the arguments are theological. In fact, the arguments came from theists and from theological traditions. They entail doctrines of God. So don't get confused by the atheism. These guys are using theistic arguments. The atheism is just a cover. Okay, step 4. The theology is anti-biblical. Let's go back to Stephen Jay Gould. Odd arrangements and funny solutions are the proof of evolution. Paths that a sensible God would never tread. No one understood this better than Darwin. Ernst Mayr has shown how Darwin, in defending evolution, consistently turned to organic parts and geographic distributions that make the least sense. Creationism must be false because of our theological premises. Without theology, there is no proof of evolution. The imperfect design argument is one of many. You can see my playlist, Theological Naturalism, to see the others. The problem of evil, Deus ex machina, infra dignitatem, and so forth. The problem of evil states that God would not create or allow natural evil to occur. Deus ex machina states that it would be incongruous for God to interact with the world. Infra dignitatem states that it would be beneath God's dignity to interact with the world. Nicholas Mellebranche argued that God values simplicity in the creation acts. Thomas Burnett and the problem of dysteleology says that God does not create structures that are not harmonious, symmetric, or otherwise that do not appear to have been designed. The religious rationalism and deism traditions argued that a saving faith and morality must be attainable via natural means. Now, this connects to creationism and the doctrine of creation. There's much more to this. You have to see these videos to get those details. The tradition against miracles arose. God would use miracles for grace, but not creation. Greater God. Greater God theology argued that the God who creates the world via natural means is greater than the God who creates via miracles. So God would use natural means. The principle of plenitude. Plenitude thinking argues that God creates the fullest world possible. God of the gaps. This tradition argues that science will eventually explain phenomena that we do not understand, rendering supernatural explanations obsolete and harmful to the faith. Anthropomorphic warning. Design inferences make God out to be like a man. You shouldn't do that. The infinite regress. If God is required to explain the origin of the world, then who created God? You have an infinite regress. Utilitarianism. All divine creations are perfectly adapted. Now that's the one we looked at a few minutes ago. The intellectual necessity. Appeals to the supernatural are science stoppers. So, a total of 14 theological traditions mandating a naturalistic origins. Arguments and evidences for the fact of evolution trace back to these traditions. Each tradition has its own story, its own historical trajectory. You can watch the videos, and you should watch the videos to really understand evolutionary thinking and evolutionary theory. These traditions are all non-biblical. That's the key here. The reason evolution is anti-biblical is because its foundation consists of religious traditions that contradict the Bible. There is no empirical scientific evidence indicating the species arose by themselves. And there are monumental scientific problems. Evolution is a religious theory, and it is anti-biblical. Religion drives science, and it matters.